Now, may I invite Chairman of the Indonesia Investment Coordinating Board, Mr. Basri, since you are dealing with investment, and as we know that the developing countries today attract more than half of the global investment, and also invest almost a quarter of investment outside their own countries. And then what would be the opportunities for developing countries to work together with the multinationals in order to benefit from the global value chain in terms of job creation, exports, and tax revenues? So what are the strategies and the policy measures we can put in place in that respect? Not only for foreign direct investment, which I'm talking about, but also in terms of non-equity mode of TNC operations, like contract manufacturing, service outsourcing. And I understand for that, the developing countries have account for more than half of the global contracts that under the TNC's non-equity operations, which is about $2.5 trillion according to our UNCTAD statistics. So could you shed light on that, Minister?
Well, thank you very much, James. Perhaps to me it is better to speak on the case of this Indonesian experience related to the issue of investment. I would like to emphasize what Minister Pangestu said about this growing middle class in Indonesia. Let me speak a little bit about the investment pattern between the Japanese and Indonesian in the last, let's say in the last 5 years. It was quite interesting, for example, like the Japanese or the Korean, there's investment in Indonesia jumped quite significantly. Like about 2 years ago, Korea was number 8 of the 8 largest investor in Indonesia, but now they become the 3rd largest, the number 3. And also the Japanese. I think this has to do with what Minister Pangestu said, it's also with the growing middle class. Because one of the problems that the Japanese investors are facing is the appreciation of the currency with the yen-daka, which makes this production cost in Japan become very expensive. But when I met the investors in Tokyo about a month ago, I asked them why you now all of a sudden interested to do an investment in Indonesia. Is simply because the yen-daka, because actually in the mid-80s you faced a similar problem, but it wasn't translated into the huge investment, especially in the sector with high value chain. And the explanation is very simple, because now we have the market size, because we do have this consuming class. So let's say in the mid-80s, if the auto industry would like to expand the production base here in Indonesia, simply the demand was not there. But now, with Mary was talking about 60, 70 million people, which is able to buy an auto, for example, motorcycles, or motor vehicles, this really translated into the figure of the investment. So we have to look at this issue of this, pattern of this investment related to the value chains from both demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, this is definitely the growing of middle class. Let me give one anecdotal evidence. For many Indonesians, we don't really understand the concept of RSVP. So I saw Ambassador Taylor was here. Every time he made an invitation for the RSVP, Indonesia will never reply for the RSVP. Because, because every time we go for the reception or go to the restaurant, we don't need to make a reservation because the food will be available anyway. But nowadays, in the last 3 years, if you go to the fine dining in the restaurant, you have to make a booking. And this is typical of what I call this growing middle class. The food not only become a basic needs, but become also a part of lifestyle. And the role of the value chain here is not only by producing goods, but also the value creation. And this has to do also with the garment product, for example. It is very hard for me to imagine that, before I came to this event, I just look at the data of the wages between Bangladesh and Indonesia. For the garment, the wages for the garment in Bangladesh is about $40 to $50 per month. But in the case of Indonesia, 145 to 150. So it's very difficult for us to compete. But it doesn't mean that we will abandon this garment business. What Indonesia can do related to this is we probably not produce the cheap garment, but we produce batik. Because people here are willing to spend millions of rupiah now to buying batik. And the role of value chains here, the innovation, is on the design. So this is the way the developing countries, you know, involved on the value chain process. It doesn't mean that we abandon the natural resources, the unskilled labor, but we just do the sort of like movement along the curve into the higher value chain. So I disagree if people look at that, you know, increasing the value chain means that we abandon the concept of the comparative advantage. No, not at all. We continue on producing these natural resources on the cheap garment, but we have to increase putting some issues, some potential of this innovation, the role of technology, exactly what Minister Pangestu said. And now, what the, you know, based on this investment pattern, what the country should do about it. I'm not really a big fan of this industrial policy in the sense that, you know, you're providing this trade protection in order to develop some sectors to have this higher value chain. I'm not really sure whether this kind of approach will entirely work. But there is a room for this industrial, quote-unquote, industrial policy if you provide an assistance from the supply side. What is the supply side? For example, like the human capital. Yeah, like when we were talking about this producing garment, producing batik, it's about time now for doing sort of like the pushing the investment to that sector. What kind of incentive we produce in order to push innovation further, whether we provide training. So we protect not the outcome of the industry, but on the government assistance on the process, through the process. We can provide this tax deductible for the R&D, because to me, this is justified. If you want to do training, rather than by asking the government institution to provide this training center, it is better to ask the private sector to provide the training and give the tax deductible. And these kind of things will drive the investment into what I call the higher value chains, without abandoning the concept of this comparative advantage or making this, you know, protectionism, you know, justified. And you're talking about the SME, yeah? This is related to the foreign investment. You're talking about the SME. Once this, you know, the foreign investment come here, they have this technology spillover. Then there will be a supply chains will follow this investment pattern. This has happened to the auto industry in Indonesia. Once you have this supply chains follow, then you can expect that there will be linked with the small medium enterprise, which provide an input. It's similar like the typical of like the Taiwanese SME, which support the electronic industry and also the auto industry. So with this kind of strategy, I do believe that we can combine the incentive for attracting investment to come to a country like Indonesia. This is based on our experience now. And also, we maintain about what Minister Goser mentioned about this to ensure the productivity. Because the key issue is always about the standard, about the productivity. Yeah? Even if we want to have this higher value chain of the product, but we cannot ensure about this productivity and also the standard, then I'm not really sure whether this process will be sustainable or not. And this is the thing that, in my view, that the direction of the investment, I call it, this is the smart investment, has to taking place in the country like Indonesia and also in other places in Asia. So back again, if we want to introduce the value chains or direct the investment to these more higher value chains, then we should look at the stages of this economic development, because you cannot introduce immediately without considering the stages of economic development. The second one is about timing, whether we are doing it at the right timing or not. And the third one is, of course, the supporting from the supply side. And you are talking about the role of technology, the role of this human capital, and also some policy issues that support the investment process, for example, like the tax incentive.
Thank you very much, Chairman Basri. So far, we have got three policymakers talking about the global value chain, talking about the changing pattern of consumer market of today and some salient features about the new industries like creative industry and ecosystem.